Hello, good afternoon. My name's Janet Goodall and I'm an associate professor in education at Swansea University. And for the last many months, I've been evaluating FreeFlowInfo, but for the past decade or so, I've been researching parental engagement. So I've been talking, excuse me, to school staff, to parents, to young people, and being immersed in the literature. So what I'd like to talk to you about this afternoon is parental engagement, what it is, what it isn't, and how to get it right, and some of the results of the evaluation from FreeFlowInfo. So this afternoon, talking about how schools can get parental engagement right and what needs to go into that, why the current state practice that we have is not fit for purpose, and how some schools were able to develop a high impact approach. And I can give you the theory and the research, but then I'll be followed by the school leaders who can actually tell you what it's like on the ground. So the first thing in terms of getting parental engagement right is figuring out why it's important, figuring out what it actually is and what the terms involved mean. So why should we care? Why do we care about engaging parents in learning? Well, for me, this is an issue of social justice. We have a school system that is inequitous. We have a school system that serves some of our children better than it serves others of our children. And to me, that's not right and it's not fair. So just think for a minute, if you know the answer to this question, how many children in the UK live in poverty or live below the poverty line? The very startling and I think extremely disturbing answer is 4 million. Almost a third of our children in the UK live in poverty, and I suspect that that's actually an underestimate at the moment, because we know that the effects of COVID-19 and the lockdown on employment and everything else may mean that more of our children have fallen below the poverty line. But assuming for a moment it is 4 million, so in a class of 30, you may have 10 children or young people in your class that haven't had enough to eat, or that don't have a stable accommodation, that don't have warm clothes, that can't come to school on all those days where there's a little bit of extra money needed. That to me is a situation I'm not particularly happy with, and a situation I'd like to see change. And we know that children growing up in poverty, and I'm telling you what you already know, are 6 times as likely to leave school without qualifications, are more likely to leave school early, and according to the older literature, are likely to have lower aspirations. I'd like to point out that the older literature is wrong, and families experiencing poverty have exactly the same aspirations for their children as any other families do. And there's a really good piece of work by Professor Morag Trainer in Scotland, and that's the title there, Can We Put the Myth of the Poverty of Aspirations to Bed Now? And what research has shown is that while parents have high aspirations for their children, many parents don't have the scaffolding, a good educational word, they don't have the scaffolding to figure out how to make those aspirations become reality. So they don't know anybody who's ever filled in a UCAS form. They don't understand how the student loan system works, and £25,000, £30,000 of debt seems overwhelming. So it's not about having lower aspirations, it's about having the scaffolding to make those aspirations come true. Basically, all of that comes to mean that there are links between educational underachievement and poverty and all of its attendant risks such as shorter life expectancy. I'd like to break that cycle, and that's why I'm involved in parental engagement, because we know, and research has shown, that around 80% of the difference in how well children from different backgrounds do in school is dependent on what happens outside of school. And we've known this for quite a while, which means that the poverty gap, if you like, is not down to schools alone to solve. And I realize school teachers and school staff often feel that they're told that they need to fix all of society's problems. And we often rely on you to fix many of society's problems. This one you can't fix on your own. But school staff, and I mean all school staff, from the groundskeeper to the head teacher, can all have a hand in supporting parental engagement. So the question then becomes, what does the research say? And this piece of work from Kathy Silva and her team at Oxford What they were doing was they were looking at the impact of early years education on young children. And they followed children from the time they were rising four through to the end of primary school to find out if those early educational experiences had an impact. And you won't be surprised at all to find out that yes, they did. They had a beneficial impact. But what they also found is what's on the screen now. For all children, the quality of the home learning environment, in other words, the conversations around the dinner table or the breakfast table or the TV, were more important for intellectual and social development than parental education, occupation, or income. What parents do is more important than who parents are. So there are a number of ideas and phrases I'm going to ask you to stop using as we go through today. And then this is the first one, that kind of parent. What can you expect from that kind of parent? What you can expect from that kind of parent, however you want to define that, is that they love their children and they want the best for them. It's not about who parents are. It's about what they do. And it's about supporting them to do the best they can for their children. In terms of social justice, you may well have seen this image before. It's in the Creative Commons. The creator has said that anybody can use it. But in the first image, it's talking about equality. And everybody has the same size box. We're giving everybody exactly the same thing. Now, if you're my height, you've spent a lot of time in supermarkets looking for tall people who can get stuff off shelves for you. As a matter of fact, I occasionally ask my oldest child to come home and do tall person things for the things that we can't reach. In the second image, people have been given not the same thing, but what they need. So the young person in the dark blue top doesn't have a box at all, and the young person in the light blue top has got two, because that's what they need to see over the fence. They've been given what they need to get over the barrier. And that's equity. And that's about, I think, where our school system is at the moment. It's certainly what we're aiming for. But at the moment, we assume that all children come into schools and settings with the same amounts and the same types of social and cultural capital. And that's not true. And it's really not true. And if you work in early years, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Not all children know the nursery rhymes. Not all children can spell or do their names. We assume that all children come in with the same background, and they don't. And we've known this for a very long time. You look at the date of Leroux's work there, that's 1989. This is not new. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I am perhaps telling the system something that it's not taking cognizance of. Slightly different thing. Will parental engagement in learning solve child poverty? No, of course it won't. Can parental engagement in children's learning help children achieve and lead to a more equitable society? Yes. Yes, it can, because it can help some of the children that aren't best served by the system we have now become better served by it. So it's important to understand what some of the terms mean. And the first term is parent. What do I mean when I say parents? I mean an adult with a significant caring responsibility for the child. So I'm going to keep saying parents because adult with a significant caring responsibility for the child is just too long to keep saying. But it could be a parent, it could be a foster parent, it could be another relative. Increasingly, it's grandparents, it could be a sibling, it could be a sports coach, it could be a minister of religion. It could, as long as it's an adult who has a significant caring responsibility for the child. And a really important point to make really early on is we often think about parents as being consumers of education and consumers of learning, clients of the school. That discourse won't be new to anybody, but they're not just on the demand side of learning. Parents have been involved, excuse me, in the supply side of learning since they first came in contact with their children. Whether that was the child's first day or if they came into the child's life later, when you think about it, if you have your own children, that first interaction with your child, perhaps the moment after they were born, whether it was saying hello or saying a specific phrase, children were learning. And children begin learning as soon as they come into the world. And parents have been part of the supply side of learning since the very beginning. And we need to recognize that. It's not that learning suddenly starts when children get to school or nursery. Children have been learning the whole time. As a good middle-class mother, I toddled down to the school when my eldest was ready to go and said, what shall I teach him? And was told in no uncertain terms that I was to teach him absolutely nothing. That was the school's job. To which I replied, well, you want a hyperactive 5-year-old that doesn't know how to walk or talk. Okay, fine. but they sort of circumscribed learning as to the sort of thing that professionals did. And I'm going to come back to that idea a bit later. But it's not true. Learning encompasses everything where a child finds out something they didn't know, or indeed an adult finds out something they didn't know. The next term I'd like to look at is this wonderful term that we use all the time, achievement gap. And the achievement gap is, I think, a really unhelpful term. It puts the emphasis on the student or the students or the pupil or the young person. That child is not achieving. Those children are not achieving. And Lanston-Billings, and the citation is there at the bottom for you, says that we should be talking about an educational debt rather than an achievement gap. And that turns the whole point on its head. It's a debt that we as a society owe to our children, to everyone's children, not just my children or your children, but to everyone's children. We have a duty under the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child to ensure that every child has access to education. And can you see how it turns things around? It's not those children aren't achieving, but we as a society are not fulfilling the debt that we owe to our children. And I think it's a really important difference. So parental engagement is not about blaming parents, and it's not about saying parents aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, or parents aren't doing what the school is asking them to do, even though that's a very, very common discourse. It's not about judging parents. It's about supporting parents to engage with learning, the learning that takes place outside of school. It's about conversations around learning. Excuse me, the research base is very, very clear. Parental engagement in learning is one of the best tools we have to support behavior, support better behavior in schools, to support attendance, to support the return of homework, and to support achievement and outcomes across the board. But we need to get it right, and we need to actually be talking about parental engagement in learning, not some of the other things that masquerade as parental engagement in learning. So a few years ago, when we started this research, many years ago when we started this research, we went into the very first school in a large project, and we asked school staff, parents, and secondary students the value of parents getting involved in their young people's education. And what we heard from staff is what you can see on the screen now. It was things like coming into school, reading in class, coming to parents' evenings, accompanying school on trips. It was about, and this was one of the phrases that came up over and over again, supporting the school, standing with the school, singing from the same hymn sheets. And even at that point, my children were teenagers at this point, that jarred a little bit. Why should parents have to stand with the school rather than with their children? And why was that even a thing? Why was there a choice to be made there? When we asked parents, parents told us it was about helping with homework and keeping track of coursework. And I sympathized with that because keeping track of my two teenagers' coursework was a full-time job in itself at that point, because they were reading things I didn't know anything about. They were learning languages I didn't speak. But interestingly, and if you have teenagers, I'd like you to think just for a minute what you think your teenagers might say to what's the value of parents being engaged in your learning. Just think for a minute what they might say, or if you interact with teenagers on a regular basis, what might they say? Well, what the young people told us was that it was about this. It was about moral support, it was about interest in learning, and it was about guidance. And the thing that we heard over and over again is somebody has to ask me how my day went, which fascinated me, because as far as I knew, my children, who did quite well in school really, did absolutely nothing in all those years of formal education, because every day I asked them, what did you do today? And was told nothing. So what was the value of that? I did try and change it once and asked my eldest what he'd had for lunch, and he thought about it for a minute and said, brown, which wasn't terribly helpful either and didn't tell me a great deal. But what the young people told us was that they had no intention of answering the question of how their day went or what they'd done that day, but it was really important that somebody asked. And one young woman in an inner city school in London told me that if she got home and her mom wasn't home, she went round all of the relatives and all of the friends till she found her mom, made her mom ask the question, and then she ignored her. But the point was, if anybody asks that question, I know they care. And for a lot of young people, that question was a simulacrum. It was a marker that somebody cared about their learning. And that's the second bit there, taking an interest in their learning. And we heard from young people over and over again that they weren't in school for their health. They weren't wearing these ridiculous clothes for their health. They weren't even there because they wanted to get good grades on their GCSEs or their A levels. They were there because it was important to their parents. Would they tell their parents? No, they wouldn't tell their parents, but we can tell their parents and you can tell their parents. And the report is called Engaging Parents to Raise Achievement. You can find it online. If you drop Alan or me an email, we can point you to it. So you can use that to tell parents, because it's hard to believe this when you've got teenagers of your own, but this is what teenagers told us. This is the important bit. It's about parental engagement with learning. It's not about getting parents in. It's about parents having conversations with their young people. And there's some other terms that I think we need to, if you'll forgive the academic word, disambiguate or disaggregate. We need to tear these terms apart because we use them to mean the same thing and they don't mean the same thing. And the first one is learning. It's a great big circle there. I'd have made it larger if I could, because it starts at birth and it goes on at least until death. Although you can buy a pre-birth phonics kit to play to the bump. I'm not suggesting that you do this, but I wish I'd had the idea. But you know perfectly well that kids are learning from the very first moments of their lives. They can recognize their parents within months. They're constantly learning. A 5-year-old's favorite word is why. Wouldn't it be great if we had a group of 15-year-olds whose favorite word was still why? The next word is education, and it's a smaller self-contained circle within learning. And the problem is that often we say education when we mean learning, and sometimes we say learning when we mean education. And there's been a debate for thousands of years about what education is, but the general consensus is that it's about specific subjects and it's intentional. So I might learn something just by, there's a large tree outside, and I've learned a great deal from watching the birds over this last year of lockdown in the tree. But that wasn't intentional. I'm not sitting here thinking, oh, what will I learn from the birds today? Yet when I pick up a research paper, I'm intentionally learning from that. So that's the difference. But that means that sports clubs and piano lessons and dance lessons, those are all instances of education. Scouts, beavers, guides. These are all instances of education because it's intentional learning. The third term is schooling. And in an ideal world, it's wholly contained within the other two. Schooling is societally sanctioned education and learning, but it's what goes on within the confines of a school. And by confines of a school, I mean a school community, not a school building. But it's the curriculum. It's both the hidden and the visible curriculum. The problem is that we say education and learning when actually we mean schooling. And many of you joining in today are schooling professionals. And I think we have one of the most highly qualified groups of schooling professionals in the world. I walk into English schools, Scottish schools, and I'm now based in South Wales, Welsh schools. And I'm amazed at the professionalism, the desire to learn, and simply what teachers are able to do. But that's schooling. Sometimes it's also education, and sometimes it's also learning. But we need to differentiate between those terms. I think we also need to change the emphasis. We've got to get away from being focused on schooling and get back to focusing on learning. I don't know about you, but I went into education because of a desire to help people learn, not because of a desire to help a particular school, a particular institution, particular academy chain. I think most of us, our emphasis is on learning, and that's what it needs to be. And it's important because that's what you have in common with parents as well, because that's what they want for their families. So I think we need to get away from a school-centered view and actually get back to a learning-centered view. And one of the questions I would ask school staff who are here today is, do the parents in your community know that you're spending the next hour or so learning about supporting them? And if they don't, why don't they? Do the parents in your community know what you're doing on an inset day? Are you sharing with them the learning that you're doing? Are you modeling for them lifelong learning? I've never met a group of people who are as anxious to continue professional learning as teachers, but we need to share that passion for learning and let families know that we're doing it. Let your pupils know, I'm not going to be here tomorrow because I'm away learning how to teach you better. That's a very good role model. And if we concentrate on learning, That's something that the community, the parents, the pupils, and the school all have in common. It's the basis for partnership with families. If you try to build a partnership with families around the school, well, the families are only tangentially connected to the school, but they're intimately connected to their young people's learning because they have been from day one. Which leads me to discuss why current practice isn't fit for purpose. And the first is simply a lack of understanding of what we're trying to do. If you're putting a lot of effort into getting parents into school, well, that's great, but that's not going to help your children and your young people nearly as much as putting that effort into helping parents support learning at home. We have some systemic issues as well in a society, in the Western society. And these are often, the first is I'm sitting here asking teachers and school staff to do something you probably aren't trained to do. And if you have early career teachers, if you have NQTs, if you have people who are training to be teachers in your school, have a conversation with them about what they've been told about parents, of what they've been learning about how to work with parents, because the chances are high that they've learned very little in their ITE about how to work with parents. Many providers assume that's going to happen for them on their placements, but what is happening on their placements? What are they learning on their placements? We also know that often when schools say, oh yes, we spoke to our parents about that, or we spoke to our parent governors, how representative are the parents that are involved with the school of the majority of the parent body? The parents that are likely to be involved with school are likely to be the parents that are comfortable being involved with school, and that may not be representative of the whole of the parent body. And we also have pervasive stereotyping of groups of parents, that kind of parent, hard to reach parents, and really interesting work, again, quite a long time in the past, which shows that we haven't learned. Hard to reach parents. Well, Crozier and Davis actually found that a lot of parents who were told that they were hard to reach found the school hard to reach. The other way to solve these problems is actually to change practice. And we know that many teachers will not change their practice until they see something works, which kind of leads to a problematic circle, which is why researchers like me get involved in evaluations of things to show whether or not things work. But we need to include the nature and value of parental engagement in initial teacher education and ongoing CPD for staff. And we've also got to be realistic. If I sit here and give you an idea of here are 5 really good things that I want you to start in your school next week, well, that's fairly safe because I'm in South Wales and most of you aren't, and you can't physically get to me to tell me what a bad idea that is. We've got to stop doing the most common thing on EduTwitter or the biggest or brightest thing in the TES and actually get back to the things that actually matter. If you think about a school as a backpack with lots of places to put a carabiners on, we've run out of attachment points. We've got to stop adding things to what schools are doing without taking away some of the things that they don't need to be doing. We've got to stop bolting things on to the outside, and we've got to go back to the basics. When I say we need to get radical, what I mean is we need to go back to the roots. That's what the word radical means. Radice, a radish is a root. We need to go back to why we have kids in school in the first place, and that's to support learning. It's not actually to collect data. What we need is targeted, responsive, and culturally appropriate support for parents' engagement in learning. So it's got to be appropriate to your group of parents. So that may be about having dogs in classroom. It may not be about having dogs in classrooms. It may be about having parents' evening in the middle of term. It may be a very bad idea. Are your parents participating in Ramadan? Don't have parents' evening in the middle of Ramadan. It needs to be culturally appropriate to your group of parents, which means you need to know your group of parents. We need to design things in conjunction with parents, school staff, young people, and researchers. And by researchers, I don't just mean people like me. Obviously, I do mean me. But if you've got someone in your school who's doing an MA, someone in your school who's preparing for headship, someone in your school who's doing an EdD, they're learning research skills. Utilize those, help them do their work, and help them to help you. The International Parents Association has a strapline, nothing for us without us. Schools often tell me, well, we put these things on for parents, but they didn't show up. Well, did you ask parents if that's what they wanted? Things need to be implemented in partnership with families. Talk to parents, talk to families, find out what they want, find out what they need, find out what's going to be useful for them, and evaluate things effectively. As a matter of fact, if you're sitting anywhere near your diary now, I'd like you to open it to the last week of term and just write FreeFlowInfo in it. And when you get to that at the last week of term, just have a think, are you doing anything differently because of this seminar today? What have you learned today that's making an impact? If you don't know whether or not things worked, how do you know what you should do and not keep doing? You need to evaluate things effectively. So how can we develop a high impact approach to parental engagement in schools? It starts from understanding what you're trying to do. If you've ever been lost and phoned somebody for directions, the first question is always, well, where are you? Unless you understand what you're trying to do, you're not going to be able to accomplish it. It needs to be, as much as possible, embedded across the school. We're talking about a change in school culture from working for parents or with parents to partnership with parents so that everybody is involved in the learning of the child. It needs to engage parents, and it needs to engage your students, it needs to engage your pupils. And as an example of an approach that appears to have had a high impact, I will say that the evaluation is ongoing. So you're getting our interim results. But the evaluation of FreeFlowInfo in the schools where it's been used, the first thing to say was that staff and parents were overwhelmingly positive about the use of FreeFlowInfo. I'm not going to explain too much what it is, other people will do that. Staff were very clear that the aim of FreeFlowInfo was parental engagement. Although it was used to tell parents things, that wasn't the aim of the app. The app wasn't there just to give parents information. It was to give parents information that would help them engage in learning. It's not just about telling parents stuff. Staff and parents used the app for two-way communication. They used it for dialogue. They didn't just use it for giving people information. They used it for dialogue around learning. Remember those professional discussions that many of us have missed over lockdown because you can't run into a colleague just by chance. Well, those professional discussions can happen with parents as well because the subject is learning. And staff and parents found it particularly useful when young people, for whatever reason, couldn't communicate about their own learning or couldn't communicate effectively about their own learning. So FreeFlowInfo allowed parents to actually see that learning in action. It also allowed staff to see the learning going on at home. And there were changes in attitude toward what went on at home. Staff also found that FreeFlowInfo reduced their workload. And again, other people will talk a bit more about that, but the DFE have also noticed that. FreeFlowInfo was very beneficial during lockdown, and it helped support learning at home. And it was really interesting that teachers said that, but often said, but we're looking forward to getting back to using it for what it was supposed to be used for, which was supporting parents' engagement with children's learning and young people's learning. There were suggestions made for improvement of the app, and it was interesting that a lot of those suggestions were actually about the way FreeFlowInfo could be used rather than FreeFlowInfo itself. So it's about embedding it in a whole school project and a whole school ethos. The bottom line of that was that FreeFlowInfo supported parental engagement in learning in the schools where we had the evaluation. I will say technology is not the answer. Technology is a support to the answer. The answer is parental engagement in children's and young people's learning. But the intelligent, consistent, planned, and appropriate use of technology can be a good part of the answer. Technology is a means of enabling what we want to happen, which is parental engagement in learning. So to conclude and bring this to a close, understand what you're trying to do and why. Be very clear from the outset of what you're trying to do, and question constantly, does this support learning? And if it doesn't support learning, why are you doing it? Because you exist as a school to support learning. Support staff and parents to support children and young people. Concentrate on learning. And I only showed you the first bit of that at the very beginning. There is actually a third image that was added a little bit later. And in this image, nobody's got a box because the barriers have been removed. So we've moved from equality to equity, and from equity to liberation. And this is what I'm after. I'm after a school system where we don't need to have accommodations for children from different backgrounds, because the system works as well as it can for everybody. And that's why I'm interested in parental engagement in learning. I want to get rid of some of the systemic barriers that our young people face. Because really, this is what it's all about parents, families, school staff engaged in learning. Thank you very much.